I thought it might be fun to talk for a few minutes about Baltimore Album Quilts. I'm originally from Baltimore, so I've always had kind of a special connection with the Baltimore Album Quilts. And I understand the geographic area, so they've always been a fascination for me. Now, Baltimore album quilts were in vogue from about 1840 to 1860. It was a very limited time period and a very limited geographic area. Now, this is an era when applique quilts were very popular, but in the Baltimore area, we find the Baltimore album quilts in Baltimore, in eastern Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, in that area, what they call the Delmarva area. Now, they were limited because in those days, ideas spread slowly because prior to the Civil War, there was no transcontinental railroad, so ideas went slowly from one place to the other. There were no women's magazines, and communication was somewhat slower. Um, After the Civil War, when the railroads became so much more accessible to people, and there was the establishment of a uniform postal code so that a letter or a magazine could get to someone all over the country. So prior to that, things kind of were limited in their geographic areas. Now, when you look at Baltimore album quilts, you'll notice that many of the blocks are very similar. Common blocks were baskets of flowers, wreaths, um, cornucopia, monuments, and clipper ships. Now, Baltimore was always called the monumental city. There's monuments all over the place. And some were maybe more sensible than others. But the clipper ship was a common motif also because as they say that the harbor, the Baltimore harbor, was the port that built the city. Now, Baltimore is up the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, which is a very, very comfortable port for a lot of a lot of shipping. The because the Chesapeake Bay is fairly calm, so the clipper ship was a big thing then. Also, in the monuments, you'll find one in particular was a monument to the grave of Major Samuel Ringgold, who was a hero of the Mexican War, and also apparently something of a heartthrob to the young women of Baltimore. As he died in the Mexican War, his final words were, "Leave me to my fate. There is much for every man to do." Probably not the most remarkable last words, but all the ladies swooned over him. So his monument appears in a great many Baltimore album quilts, along with some famous buildings and other monuments that existed at the time. Also, the Baltimore album quilt was frequently a presentation quilt. Now, they were given to people for various reasons, but one of the things that made them unique was inscriptions, names, inscriptions, little proverbs and things. And the thing that made that possible was the discovery of India ink, which was a permanent ink. And prior to the mid 19th century, there were no real permanent inks that they could be used for inscriptions on things. So once they had that, they could add a lot of little details and names and inscriptions to the quilts. At the end of the popularity of the quilt, they just stopped abruptly because of the Civil War. And everyone moved from doing frivolous things to working on more practical things and more practical quilts in support of the Civil War soldiers. Now, one of the reasons why the blocks are so similar, they've discovered, and this is difficult because so many of women's history is lost because it was not considered important. But the ladies of Baltimore would purchase a muslin block with the design based it on. So a lot of the blocks are almost identical because they were purchased from the same source. And they at one point found one block that was basted and not sewn. So they were able to rebuild this history. The ladies would buy these blocks, take them home, do the applique, and then put the quilt together. The settings were often different, and the borders were very different quite often. Although the most classic design is the swags, the curved swags around the border. Now, after the Civil War, the Baltimore Album Quilt it was no longer in fashion. Other things became important and they just sort of faded away until the 1920s when Dr. William Rush Dutton, who was considered one of the fathers of occupational therapy, and he was a psychiatrist at Shepherd Pratt Hospital, which is a very famous psychiatric hospital in Baltimore. He was looking for occupational activities for the women he was taking care of, and he thought quilts would be a good therapy for his nervous women because quilting fostered competition. It seems to me that Dr. Dutton neither understood quilting nor women. However, he is credited with saving the Baltimore Album Quilts. He went around and collected them from all sorts of places and eventually wrote a book which he self-published called Old Quilts. And his efforts actually became the basis of several really fine collections of Baltimore Album Quilts. Now, I'm going to show you some pictures after this, some pictures of Baltimore Album Quilts and some close-ups of the blocks. These are all old ones. None of them are new ones. Although there are some really beautiful new ones that have been made. But these are all antique ones, and you'll see some of the motifs that I was talking about.